I suppose we shouldn't be particularly surprised that the guy who's running the elected House doesn't want to see the Commons watered down to some extent by an elected Lords.
That's right, Tom. And it's not unusual for a speaker to try to defend the prerogatives and the position of the House of Commons within our constitutional system. We see this more frequently at the moment in terms of clashes between the speaker and the government of the day, and the speaker sometimes does tell off the government for not respecting the House of Commons. We've seen it much less in terms of bicameral clashes between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, precisely because at the moment, the way that the House of Lords positions itself within our system is quite a deferential one to the House of Commons. And I think Lindsay Hoyle is making quite a straightforward point here, which is that if you give the House of Lords, or whatever it's called, a Senate, an elected mandate, it will use that mandate to try to challenge the elected mandate of the House of Commons.
I suppose we do talk about the United Kingdom being what's called a bicameral parliament, two chambers. But in many ways, it doesn't really work as a bicameral parliament. To some extent, you could argue it's closer to a unicameral parliament, having just one senior chamber, unlike in the United States, where you have real bicameralism, the Senate challenging the House of Representatives, bills being stuck, there being gridlock, as it's described very often. In the United Kingdom, if the Commons want something, it gets passed.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. I mean, in a sense, we have functionally a unicameral system, if not one in form. In the political science literature, people talk about veto players or veto points. So these are institutions whose consent is required to get legislation through and can use that to veto or block legislation. And although the House of Lords does have some delaying power, in fact, the House of Lords' ability to kill legislation that has majority support in the House of Commons is very weak. And so most political scientists actually classify Britain as just having one veto player, which is a majority in the House of Commons.
That's interesting, although I suppose people looking at the House of Lords might think that this is an anachronistic organisation. There are 70 people in there who are there by birthright. There are people who seem to be appointed perhaps by being rather too close or donating perhaps too much money to political parties. It doesn't look like the most clean organisation on the planet. Is Labour onto something in terms of wanting to change it in some way?
I mean, I think, these are easy points to make. And I mean, the argument that I would make is that, first of all, this kind of unelected nature of it is what ensures the protection of the House of Commons. So we have to think about this in terms of the relationship to the House of Commons. I think the Brown Review, one of the problems with it, this is the proposals for Labour's reforms, didn't really think about how Brown's suggestions of refining other institutions would play on the House of Commons. The safeguard of the House of Commons is some of this kind of what we would see as, semi-ridiculous elements of the House of Lords, like the bishops and the hereditaries. Once you start to kind of professionalize it and refine it, you can do a bit of that. But I think the more that you do that, the more that it gets a sense of itself that it can then use to overpower the House of Commons.